Hi, welcome back to the Cobot channel. This week I'm joined by Janet Bellamy, and we're going to talk a little bit about how cobots can be used in the food industry. Hi, Janet.
Hi, Mark.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role and what your organisation does?
Yes, so my name's Janet Bellamy and I'm Associate Professor of Digitalisation and Emerging Technology, and I'm based at the National Centre for Food Manufacturing, which is part of the University of Lincoln. And we sit about 50 miles south of our Lincoln campus, right in the heart of Food Valley. So what we are there purely for the industry, basically. In terms of the offering that we have three different strings to our bow. The first one of those is skills. So we're very much involved in degree apprenticeships and training for food and drink sector. The second part of what we do is consultancy services. And the third part is research, and that research can be attached to projects. One of those areas that we're involved with, and that's how we came to be introduced to each other, is obviously robotics and automation. So very big for us and very important for the sector.
Excellent, excellent. So specifically in the food and sort of agriculture sector, what are the main challenges that those companies face that you're being told from end users, really?
I think the thing that really stands out for me is the understanding, the knowledge, knowing where to go and actually knowing what you want is the most difficult question to answer, I think, is what do I want, what do I need, and where do I get that information from? I think one of the other challenges that we see is the cost and how it's funded. A lot of the sector are struggling in terms of margin. Margin isn't improving, it's getting harder for people. Costs are going up, profits are going down. So how do you finance these things? And there's a lot of myth around how much some of these projects cost, and everybody seems to think that all of the figures start at $1 million plus, and it's not that way at all. So some of the work that we try to do is to showcase what's going on, what's available, and just be very realistic about what's achievable and how much it costs and what it takes to actually deliver these types of projects.
Yeah, to walk people through the knowledge that they need to gain, really, I guess.
Very much so. And I think, the other thing is, who do you trust? When you're doing something like this, who can you actually go to and have an open and frank conversation with? And one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves on is we're not receiving commission payments from anybody. We don't get commission payments from Universal Robots. What we do is provide what we think is the best advice and the best solution for the business, and partner them with providers that can deliver that type of service. And I suppose the advantage that we've got is we see lots of things. We go into lots of factories. We see lots of new research, new innovation coming forward that we can sort of match make and put those together with industry need.
Yeah. And from your experience, how can robotics and automation, if they adopted into those kind of companies, what kind of radical changes can they make? I mean, is it all about productivity, or is there other things that they can see improvements in as well?
There's lots of things that you get improvements as a result of that. You can even say job security and resilience of the business. And in many ways, people think that robotics are restrictive in that they can then only do one thing. What we're seeing now as the sector develops and as the automotive sector develops, and we've seen that from their history, we can see that a robot can do 20 tasks. It doesn't have to just do one task. So it's thinking more laterally, I think, in terms of what the capabilities of that equipment is, and then what else can it do while it's there. And if you think about those repetitive, mundane jobs that people employed in food and drink sometimes have to do, you're freeing them up from those jobs and from those tasks that, quite frankly, it's not a reasonable thing to expect to stand there for 12 hours a day and do that type of task. So if a robot can do it, what else can that individual do? It's not about taking them out of the business completely. It's giving them something that's more rewarding, more challenging for them, where they can be upskilled to have a more rewarding and actually a higher paid job, basically, because they've got opportunity there.
Yeah, they're adding more value to the process, aren't they?
Absolutely.
We talk about robots taking over lifting and twisting, for ergonomics, which is it's not good for somebody to do for all the whole working life. Obviously staff welfare is a big concern these days. We want to offer the best sort of environment to employ people, and if we can take away those horrible tasks, as you said, that's better, isn't it, for everybody concerned, I guess.
And most of the days lost in sickness and absence are around musculoskeletal issues. If you've got, a different way of completing that task other than somebody trying to pick boxes up, as I say, pack and stack all day, then surely that's got to be better from a health and well-being point of view for the workforce. And I think it also shows the workforce that you're investing in them as part of that future. So they feel more involved in what's going on in the business. They feel like they've got a stake in that business, and they're more likely to put more effort in and be more creative. And I think the more that you can free individuals up to be creative, they'll be providing your solutions and your strategy for the business going forward, because they're dealing with that every day. They know what's wrong. They know what they need to do to put it right. It's just in many cases they're not empowered to do that, and in others they don't have time.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? In the food industry, it's such a fast-moving industry that most people employed in that just don't have the time to consider how they could improve their production or how they could make things better. It's a mad rush, isn't it, all the time, I think.
It is, and in some ways, even from my days in industry, you're your own worst enemy, because you don't actually feel like you've done a good job unless you've put a forest fire out somewhere in the Amazon, so you're sort of geared to this superhero mentality and this adrenaline rush that, I have to have been up against it all day to have had a really good day and my money today. And that's not the way at all. So to try and adapt to this new world, that actually there's easier and smarter ways of doing it, it's very difficult to comprehend when you've been in that high pressure environment, and you come to like that adrenaline rush. I'm not saying you necessarily like the stress and the aggravation of it, but you do come to need that adrenaline rush and that excitement to feel like you've done a good job.
Yes, feel fulfilled at the end of the day, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we don't see the food industry as being a major adopter of automation historically, and we can see that starting to change now. But what do you think the main obstacles have been for people to adopt automation into those processes? Is it that fast-paced work environment that they haven't had the time to reflect and consider automation?
It's part of it, but I think the real reason is people. People block it. People block it because they don't understand it, or they think that it's something that it's not. So when we look at, the advances in cars and driving a car, I don't need to be a car designer or an engineer to be able to get in a car and drive it. I just need to know how to drive that car. And I think there's an assumption that when you start to get into robotics, you need to be a computer scientist. For programming, you need to be a roboticist to enable that to be in your factory or in your business. And you don't. You just need to know how to operate it and make sure that it's doing what you need it to do. And I think as well, because this is a different way of creating products and creating processes, what we currently see as our process might not be our process with a robot. We shouldn't just be focusing on replacing a human with a robot. That's not what this is, because the robot can do far more than the human in some circumstances and make far more decisions within a shorter period of time and with more accuracy. So when we start to think about what the process is, we have to be open to changing that process and say, well, actually, maybe we should try it this way. It's not about just replicating what the person's doing. It's thinking in a very different way about your process as a whole, and sometimes starting with a blank piece of paper and saying, are we actually doing it the right way? Is there a better way of doing this with robots?
And that kind of leads me on to one of the first things you said when you talked about the consultancy services. So how can your organization help people on that pathway, that journey, if you like, from automation? Is there things that you can offer small companies, large companies, to walk them down the path of what they need to look at and how they can consider a process?
Absolutely, and it doesn't matter the size of the company for us. We will work with a sole trader, an SME, right the way through to major global companies. We have projects and schemes that run that we manage. So we're working through shared prosperity, leveling up, and all of these funds that people will have heard of. So we can offer a certain amount of time as part of those grants with support to businesses. But in other cases, we can be part of an application for funding. We can help with funding applications, or we can be employed as consultants. So there's lots of different routes to be able to work with us. The first route is to pick the phone up and talk to us, because then you know what we can do. And we're very clear, we will always try and support business. That's what we're here to do. What we can do from a process point of view is challenge some of those ideas and beliefs. So we can look at the premises, look at the process, help the business to understand what it is they're trying to achieve, how they can potentially achieve that, and is it the right way, or is there another way of doing this? And then even down to the fact of being able to identify people that they could work with to actually deliver that project in the creation stages. So anywhere from, you know, we talk about technology readiness levels, but anywhere from a level 2, which is the concept, I've had an idea, right the way through to 9, which is full use and commercialization and in situ and working. So it doesn't matter where it sits, anywhere within that band.
So that kind of leads me on to the next question really nicely. If a company was to approach you and say, we want to consider robotics in our company, what kind of tasks, what kind of areas maybe in the low care would you look at first? Would it be, as we discussed, about lifting, twisting, packing, that sort of thing, or are there other areas that you would consider first?
No, I think it depends on the business need. So what we don't come with is a ready-made list and a ready-made checklist of trying to steer a business towards a solution. We don't look at that. What we will look at is what's the business need first and foremost. Once we understand that, then it's about, as I say, identifying areas for improvement. And we'll always say to a business, start small but think big. So if you start with the smaller projects, you're starting to build your confidence, you get some good wins early on, and then you're ready to think a little bit more laterally about what the options are to develop that further. In some cases, it is the packing area that's the biggest issue for the business, because it's where most of the staff are. So that if they're looking for optimizing that, building more efficiency into that area, they might need to look at that area first. So, you know, when we talk about end-of-line solutions, there's an awful lot of end-of-line solutions out there, but what's best for the business? Again, what do they need? And what we'll do is showcase some of those potential solutions, talk them through how that could fit into their process. And again, in many cases, this isn't about a full factory redesign. Just because you look at a piece of equipment and it's in a particular format doesn't mean that's the format you have to take, because it might not fit your premises, it might not fit your existing lines. So very much now the focus is around integration with legacy kit and making sure that it's adaptable to different areas and different demands, so that it is easier for businesses to make that transformation. So just because that's how you're viewing it doesn't mean that's all that's available.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because we talk about something similar called incremental adoption. It's doing it step by step. So, most people want to transform the business, but we always say start with the first robot, and then once you're in, and then start on that process, you can do it bit by bit rather than having to change your entire factory floor. And I think that would be quite scary for most companies to have to do that. It's a cultural change as well as technologically. But if you can get one robot in first, then that leads on to the next and the next and so on. It's quite interesting, because I was just going to ask you about this, because you've probably seen how production has changed for companies. We talk about mass customization, and particularly in food and drink, where it might be smaller distilleries, smaller breweries do it like craft beer, and they put them in much smaller volumes, as opposed to the national breweries that produce millions and millions of cans of a particular type of beer, whereas smaller craft breweries are in much smaller volumes. But they would normally not think about automation being open to them. Are you seeing the same sort of trend as in the food industry, where that mass customization is being demanded by the customers?
I think it's gone the other way. It's gone more to specialism. So certainly, the factories that I was building and the processes I was developing 10 years ago were very much around mass production and how we could, sort of reduce changeover times. It was very much a continuous running. What did that look like? And building that efficiency through the volume that was run through. That isn't there anymore, because retailers are obviously looking for ways of building loyalty to their brands, to their for their customers. And I think that there's more specialism now than there ever was. And I think actually production runs have got shorter. The only people that are taking advantage of those longer runs are the brands themselves, who are able to control what that brand format looks like. But even they're coming under pressure to come up with different sizes, different connotations of a product, so that people have the flexibility for any particular situation. And you know, the likes of Coca-Cola are a prime example of that. You can buy different types of Coca-Cola now. You can buy personalized cans, bottles. There's different sizes depending on what you want. You're losing that ability to create mass-produced products. It's more about personalization for consumer, and how do you deliver that? And that becomes very difficult to deliver in those heavily automated lines that are specifically designed for one type of packaging, one type of pot, one type of can. How do you put the flexibility into that? And that's really where I see robotics coming into its own, because that's where robotics can make that change and allow for that level of flexibility, but at the scale of mass production to be able to allow you to run rates through.
Yes. It's interesting, we spoke about this earlier about costs and food companies operating very slim margins. Do you think by using robotics and automation, they can actually maintain that margin by reducing costs out of their production, and how that would affect our food security? It's in the news at the moment, isn't it? We want to maintain our food security for the future. But do you think robotics and automation can play a part in that?
Definitely. I mean, in manufacturing alone, there's 1 million vacancies across the UK. In the food and drink sector, there are 9 vacancies for every 100 members of staff. So we are struggling to recruit. We're struggling to get the skills. And, you know, for a lot of people, they are leaving the industry. So how do we retain them within the industry? And we have to give them options. We have to give them career choices. And I think robotics help us to do that. Again, freeing up from those mundane tasks, creating opportunity, new types of roles, new types of processes. But it also gives us flexibility and agility in our processes as well. Because with robotics and with digital, particularly, which the two are connected, when you start to build in the AI functions of robotics and the controls, what you're doing is getting to the real sweet spot of where you can make savings, because you can't improve something if you can't measure it.
Yes.
And as we are at the minute, we're not measuring. So we need that robotic revolution really to come in, bring AI, bring the data management, the digitalization with it, and enable us to fine tune what we're doing in our processes. At the minute, whatever we do, we don't have time to even look at it as an industry. You know, we gather warehouses full of pieces of paper that are needed for the next 7 years or 11 years or whatever it is we're saving paper for traceability, for legal purposes. But all we're doing is accumulating warehouses full of paper. And when do we ever go back to those pieces of paper outside of an audit and look and analyze the data and say, actually, yeah, this is what we should have done differently here? So what we need to get to is that real-time world that exists with robots, that exists with digitalization. And that transformation is very much about the whole way that we operate. And that's a real change from how we've operated historically.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talked about this as well, and it kind of led on to the next question. Really, is like, with people working in the industry currently, with the changes that are taking place, do you think that's going to open up new opportunities for people who are in engineering to diversify into these new sort of skill groups?
Absolutely, and we're seeing that now. You know, we're seeing that there's a lot more demand for robotics and automation, and even emerging technology. I mean, that's where my job title came from: digitalization and emerging technology. It was driven by the demand from degree apprenticeships, and you know, we've just recently looked at our engineering structure for our degree apprenticeship delivery, and we've changed it deliberately to incorporate that, because we recognize that there is a gap there. People do need, you know, they're asking for that gap. Employees are asking for that gap to be filled as well. They feel that they need that training and that level of understanding, and we're able to develop that and bring it on board. You know, we're never going to have all the solutions at our fingertips, but some of this is also about knowing where I can go to. Where do I go to look for that next idea? And it's opening up those opportunities and those windows that say, actually, yes, this is where you need to be. So, I mean, even things like PPMA and some of the other great shows that are out there, how do we involve ourselves or incorporate with those shows to promote this level of technology, rather than just sort of, you know, just rolling the same stuff out all the time? And that's what industry have done. They've relied on pre-existing methods, proven methods, because that's safe. But safe doesn't give you a better outcome. It just gives you the same outcome. And we know that that outcome isn't working. So we have to try something different. And that starts with skills, gaining the confidence, but also being brave enough to go out there and look and see and talk to people. And don't be afraid of asking a daft question, because I ask them every day, you know, ask that question and find out, because probably, you know, 9 out of the 10 people that you stood with are probably thinking the same thing, but too afraid to say it. So, you know, let's talk in industry language and make sure that people understand what we're talking about as well when we're talking about technology, so that we can translate it to something that they know and understand.
But we say, don't we, you know, if you're going to get an industrial revolution, you've got to think like a revolutionary. And we've got to think like that, haven't we, to make people change radically what they're doing. I've got one last question for you. Do you see any sort of developments in the agricultural sector for robotics, any opportunities where people are asking about that? Because that's further in the supply chain and probably one of the least automated sort of parts of the supply chain, if you like.
Yes, and I'm sure you're aware that our sister college is Rysholme, and Rysholme is the European Centre for PhDs in robotics and agri-robotics. So there's an awful lot of work coming out of that centre, and I know that again this week there's just been, I think it's £50 million of investment announced for robotics and within agri-tech. So yes, you know, there's a lot out there. It's interesting that the perception is that there aren't that many solutions. There's a lot of solutions, and when we were involved with the Cotomaco project across Northwest Europe, and that brought in different sectors, and we analysed the amount of solutions that were out there, and certainly within the agri-food sector, about 70% of all of our processes have robotic solutions. We just don't adopt them, or we haven't adopted them. So I think it's still very much about this knowledge, education, and understanding where to go with this or how it works. And I still feel that the biggest blocker is that we always go for the safe option, because we don't want to make a bad investment. We don't want to set ourselves back. A lot of the time, that capital is hard come by, so you don't want to waste that opportunity, and you want to be sure that it's going to deliver the capacity and the efficiency that you're saying it will do. And a lot of the projects that we're talking about with agri or even with manufacturing, they take time. They're not instant projects. You can't go and buy something off the shelf. You have to develop that. You have to integrate it into your business. But that doesn't mean it needs to take 6 years. You know, it can take 6 months. It can take 16 weeks. It really just depends on who those partners are and what you're trying to do. And I think you've just got to do it. You've got to trust and do it. And where you don't trust, then ask for advice, and ask for advice from independent people that can say, yes, that's a good idea. No, that's a bad idea. Or have you thought about this? And people will do that. People will support you. You know, like yourself, Mark. I mean, you know, you're all very approachable within Universal, and I'm sure, you know, that you have given some good, honest, and frank advice to your customers as well. And that's what it's about. Don't be afraid of asking, because the days have changed where salesmen used to be just there to sell you a robot. That's not how it is anymore. It's about longer term partnerships, and I think people have to trust in that.
It is. It's a journey. We always look at this, that we're trying to show people what the possibilities are by sharing examples of previous companies that have adopted this technology and showing them the success. And we only want customers that are sustainable, because, as we said, in incremental adoption, if you put a robot in and it works, then there's going to be more robots that are bought throughout that period of time. So it's in our interest to make sure people have got the right product to do the right application. And you know, the whole principle of Universal Robots is about empowering people that would never usually use robots to get them into their businesses. So, you know, that's what we're all about.
I mean, in agri-tech now, we're using robots to assess yield. We're using them to pick. You know, they're used for spraying applications. And again, it's more of the bespoke rather than the mass. So, you know, when you look at a field, you can scan a field with a drone. You can understand where are the dry areas, and then you can go over and water it with a drone, but you're only watering the dry areas. You're not watering the whole field. So you're maintaining the essential nutrients in the soil where you need them to be maintained, and where you need to add water, you're adding water. And it's just that more efficient use of resources. You know, and we're talking a simple drone here, you know, with adaptation to it. So it doesn't have to be something that's over engineered, or very, very costly. It can be something that's affordable, that's achievable for anybody, whether you're, as I said, an SME or a global entity. It doesn't matter.
That's been such an interesting chat today, Janet. I really appreciate your time for doing this. Join us next time on the Cobot channel when we'll have another interesting chat from somebody from the world of robotics.